Names on the envelopes included town officials, teachers, business owners, even the mayor's daughter. Some dated back decades, others from just last month. It wasn't just secrets, this was a living, breathing catalog of every sin, betrayal, and buried crime in Whitley Hollow. The sheriff, Elias Rowe, a lifelong resident of the town, felt his hands tremble as he flipped through the first few files. One name in particular stopped him cold. Wrote M. 1997. His own sister. He closed the box and locked the library doors. If this got out, the entire town's facade would crumble. Miriam hadn't just been collecting secrets. She was holding the town hostage. 2 weeks later, an anonymous email with 3 of the letters was sent to the local newspaper. The editor resigned the next day without a word. The town preacher stopped showing up to Sunday service, and then came the second murder. Clara Weems, the mayor's secretary, was found drowned in her bathtub. No water on the floor and no fingerprints on the faucet. Another envelope from Miriam's collection disappeared from the sheriff's evidence room that same night. Someone wasn't just trying to cover their tracks. They were systematically erasing the past. Sheriff Rowe, already under pressure, turned to the only person who might know more about Miriam's secrets. Lucien Graves, a former true crime journalist who had returned to Whitley Hollow last year after a scandalous fall from grace. Lucien had grown up sneaking into the library as a kid. He had once called Miriam his mentor. "I always thought she kept too many things to herself," Lucien said, lighting a cigarette with a shaking hand. "But blackmail? That's not Miriam, unless..." Unless what? Lucien stared out at the cemetery across from the library. Unless she wasn't blackmailing them for money, what if she was trying to protect someone? The sheriff handed Lucien a select batch of the letters, carefully redacted, of course. One caught Lucien's attention immediately. It was dated July 17, 1994, and signed only with an initial, G. It read like a confession. "If this gets out, everything burns. My family, the company, the whole damn town." The deal was made, and no one walks away from it. "We built this place on blood and silence. Remember the orchard." "Bury this, Miriam." Lucien remembered the orchard. It had burned down 20 years ago. Officially ruled an accident, but locals still talked about screams in the fire, though no bodies were ever found. He needed to know what Miriam knew. Not just about the orchard, but about the deal, the people who made it, and what secrets she had kept hidden behind those locked doors all these years. He needed access to the missing letters. But they weren't in evidence anymore. And Miriam's personal safe, reportedly buried in the crawl space under her home, had just been ransacked, burned open with what looked like military-grade thermite. Someone was desperate to erase her legacy. Lucien started to feel the walls closing in. His phone had a new number, calling at 3:00 a.m. every night, just silence on the other end. Then the pictures began arriving in the mail. Shots of him outside his home from angles no one could explain. And then he saw it. In the background of one photo, inside the frame of his living room mirror, Miriam standing behind him. But she had been dead for almost a month. Nestled in the sleepy, tree-lined heart of Whitley Hollow, the town's only library had stood for over a century. A sandstone relic of simpler times, it was a place where the smell of aging books mingled with dust and quiet secrets. Few frequented the library these days, except for one woman, Miriam Bellamy, the town librarian. Miriam was in her late 60s, always clad in woolen cardigans and long skirts, with silver hair tied neatly in a bun. To the townspeople, she was a harmless eccentric, more married to books than to people. But on a rainy Thursday morning, Miriam was found dead in the library's restricted archives, her body slumped between 2 mahogany shelves, her throat slit with surgical precision. Whitley Hollow hadn't seen a murder in over 40 years. People think the quiet ones have no secrets, but they forget it's the quiet ones who watch and remember everything. The entire town buzzed with speculation. Some called it a robbery gone wrong. Others whispered of an affair, revenge, or even a ghost from Miriam's past. but nothing explained why the door to the restricted archives had been locked from the inside, or why there was no sign of forced entry. And then the sheriff's department discovered something they weren't prepared for. Hidden behind the bottom drawer of Miriam's desk was a false panel. Inside was a wooden box, carefully carved with Latin inscriptions. Within it lay hundreds of envelopes, yellowed with time, each marked with a date, and a name written in Miriam's elegant cursive. Inside each envelope, a letter, some with photos, others with financial records, transcripts, even love notes. All were blackmail materials. The photo haunted Lucien, not just because Miriam was standing behind him, but because in the image, blurred, grainy, impossible, her expression wasn't one of menace. It was fear. But who took the picture? How did they get inside? And why would someone send it to him? He called Sheriff Rowe the next morning, voice hoarse, mind frayed. "Burn it," the sheriff growled after seeing the image. Lucien didn't answer. "You think this is supernatural, Graves?" Lucien rubbed his temples. "I think this is a message. Not all ghosts are dead. Some walk in plain sight, draped in power, not sheets." The investigation into Miriam's murder had stalled. Every clue led to a dead end or a disappearance. Witnesses were recanting. Evidence was missing. The letters were vanishing. And then came the fourth. Dean Holloway, the high school principal, was found in his car at the edge of the orchard ruins, his throat cut open, an envelope burned beside him. The only word still legible on the scorched page was Campbell. Sheriff Rowe recognized the name immediately. Judge Rupert Campbell retired 5 years ago after a quiet career of community service and special favors. Lucien and Rowe met at the old orchard ruins, the scorched earth now overgrown with weeds and silence. "You ever think she was collecting these letters as insurance?" Lucien asked. Rowe shook his head. "Miriam wasn't afraid of people. She was afraid of the past." That's when Lucien remembered something. Back when he was a boy, Miriam had once caught him sneaking into the restricted section of the library. Instead of punishing him, she handed him a worn book, The Ciphers of Silence, and said, he found that book again. Inside, a handwritten note from Miriam. "The orchard wasn't an accident. Look beneath the roots." It wasn't metaphoric. Lucien dug through county archives, old blueprints, and geological surveys. The orchard had been planted atop an abandoned military outpost from the Cold War. The land had been sold to the town under a secret agreement signed by none other than Judge Campbell, Mayor Trudy Klein's father, and 2 other silent partners. One of them, Miriam's brother. The outpost had conducted experiments, not weapons, but psychological studies, human behavior under stress, isolation chambers, rumors of MK Ultra-style methods. Whitley Hollow wasn't just a sleepy town. It was a containment zone. And Miriam had been their archivist. Every secret starts with a lie. Every truth ends in blood. Lucien wasn't the only one digging. Late one night, he returned home to find his apartment ransacked, but nothing was stolen except a box of old cassette tapes he had taken from the library years ago. One tape was left on his kitchen counter, a label scrawled in red ink, "Listen, 412. He played the tape. Silence for the first 4 minutes. Then a woman's voice, trembling, distant. "If you're hearing this, I'm already dead. They've come for me. They know I kept everything, not for money, for justice. The fire was no accident. There were children. They never made it out. They said it would be covered up, but I wrote it all down. You'll find the full record under the church floorboards. The bell tower hides more than God." Lucien dropped the tape. He drove to the old stone church, long since abandoned, its windows boarded up and its steeple sagging. Inside, the musty air clung to every breath. He made his way to the bell tower stairs, each creak echoing like a scream. At the top, hidden beneath a loose wooden plank, a rusted metal box. Inside, a leather-bound journal, Miriam's handwriting. It detailed names, dates, files. The orphan children taken to the outpost under the guise of adoption, subjected to psychological trials, experiments meant to induce fear, loyalty, and obedience. The fire, it had been set when one of the children escaped and tried to expose them. The blaze was meant to erase the evidence and every living witness. Lucien read the final journal entry. I was complicit. I filed the records. I let them keep going, but no more. If this town ever truly wants to heal, the truth must be exhumed. If you're reading this, Lucien, run. Because once you open the ground beneath the orchard, they will come for you too. Some truths don't set you free, they bury you deeper. Just then, headlights cut across the cracked stained glass windows. A black SUV idled outside. Lucien grabbed the journal and slipped out the back. He didn't know who they were, but he knew what they wanted. Not just Miriam's records. Silence. As he drove toward the outskirts of town, the wind picked up and the air grew colder. He passed the hollowed orchard one last time. That's when he saw it. Someone standing in the center of the field, arms raised toward the sky. It wasn't a silhouette. It was a child, face charred, eyes hollow, watching him. Lucien didn't sleep that night. The child's burned face haunted him, not because it was terrifying, though it was, but because it looked familiar. Not someone he recognized. Something. A photo, a sketch, a face from the tapes Miriam had once let him view in secret long before she ever hinted at what the library truly held. He pulled over on the outskirts of Whitley Hollow, parked beneath a collapsed billboard that once welcomed visitors with the phrase, Whitley Hollow, a safe place to call home. Safe was a lie, home was a prison, and Lucien was beginning to realize he had grown up inside a conspiracy. By dawn, Lucien returned to the one person who might still be willing to help, Sheriff Elias Rowe. But when he arrived at the sheriff's home, he found the front door wide open, the kitchen chairs overturned, and the strong smell of burnt chemicals lingering in the air. Rowe was gone. No note, no struggle, just gone. In the center of the sheriff's table sat a single item, one of Miriam's envelopes. It was sealed. Lucien opened it. The letter was brief. There are 4 left, they know. If they find me before you do, bury the truth beneath the bell once more. It was signed. Lucien reread the journal entries from the church. Miriam had detailed 23 names, children selected from state orphanages between 1956 and 1971, all relocated to Whitley Hollow under cover of resettlement, only to be passed into the education program run at the orchard site. Of the 23, only 6 were ever recorded as adopted. None were officially registered at any school. Only initials marked the rest. C-R, D-H, M-B, G. Lucien's hands trembled as he flipped to the last pages. One child had survived. Not escaped, survived, hidden in plain sight, raised quietly, protected by someone within the system, named Lucien Graves. He dropped the journal. Everything started spinning, his recurring nightmares, the obsessive need to dig, to expose, the insomnia, the blackout years as a child, even Miriam's strange attachment to him. She had raised him like a son without ever telling him why. Because she hadn't rescued him from the library, she had rescued him from the orchard. Lucien had been part of the program, maybe even the reason it ended. And someone in Whitley Hollow had spent years erasing every trace of that past except Miriam, which meant that child in the orchard field, it might not have been real. It might have been a memory. That same day, the local paper published a strange obituary. No photo, no family, just a name. Martin Blake. Lucien recognized it instantly. One of the initials in the journal, MB, one of the missing children. He stormed into the editor's office, demanding answers. The editor, pale and shaking, said the obit had come via fax from an anonymous number. The body was found at the base of Widow's Bluff, face unrecognizable. No ID, only clue, a hospital wristband with the name Blake Martin and the initials WHX13. WH equals Willie Hollow. EX13 equals Experiment 13. Lucien felt sick. He went back to the library. The crime scene was sealed, but he knew the sheriff had once shown him a back entrance through the basement boiler room. Down there, buried in the crawlspace where Miriam once stored banned books and damaged returns, Lucien found another locked box, this one metal, labeled Final Subjects. And he cracked it open. Inside, cassette tapes, dozens, photos, scans of brainwaves, psychological assessments, and transcripts of interrogation sessions with children. Children who spoke of voices in their heads, of waking up in rooms without doors, of dreams where they watched themselves die over and over again. But one recording stood out, a whispered confession from a child who couldn't have been older than 7. They said if I talked, they'd put me back underground, but Miss Miriam says I'm safe now. I don't remember my real name. I think it was L? Maybe Lucien? Lucien couldn't breathe. He wasn't just part of the story. He was the story. That's why Miriam had collected everything. Not for blackmail, not even just for justice. She had been protecting him and others like him. The letters, the threats, the manipulation, it was all to hold the town's monsters in check, to make sure they never came back for him. And now she was gone, and they were hunting again. That night, a final message was slipped under Lucien's door, a folded page with a typed warning. Three still walk among you. One wears a robe, and one wears a badge. One wears a mask. They remember what you were, they know what you could become, and they will stop at nothing to keep you buried. Lucien froze. Another child from the files, alive, somewhere, watching, warning him. He remembered the orchard again, the fire, the screams. He remembered a mirror in a dark hallway and a girl with no eyes. He remembered something buried beneath that place, not metaphorically, literally buried. And now only one thing was clear. If he wanted answers, if he wanted to survive, he would have to go back to where it all began. Rain lashed against the windshield as Lucien approached the orchard, or what was left of it. The twisted branches still reached like blackened hands from the earth, the remnants of trees that had once shielded the town's worst secrets. But now, the silence was different. It was as if the ground itself was waiting. He parked on the roadside, headlights dimmed. In his bag, Miriam's journal, 3 cassette tapes, a flashlight, and a single revolver left behind by Sheriff Rowe, who still hadn't resurfaced. The message from GT replayed in his mind. 3 still walk among you. 1 wears a robe. No one wears a badge. No one wears a mask. He knew now what that meant. The judge, the sheriff, and someone else, someone unseen. Lucien crept through the weeds to the heart of the orchard ruins. There, near a moss-covered stone well, he found it. The trapdoor, nearly invisible beneath a layer of dead leaves and rusted chain. It matched the diagram from Miriam's journal. Exactly. It led into the underground bunker, the original Cold War facility that predated the orchard. Lucien descended. The metal ladder groaned beneath his weight. The smell hit him first, mildew, decay, and something older. The air was thick with memory. At the bottom, the corridor stretched into darkness, lined with steel doors and shattered bulbs. Red emergency lights flickered in irregular intervals, casting shadows that seemed to breathe. The journal had mentioned a room 12. He found it behind a bent bulkhead, its number painted in faded black. It's not just what they did to you, it's what they made you forget. Inside, a single chair bolted to the floor, restraints on the arms, mirrors on the walls, not one-way glass, just reflection. The camera hung above, long dead. Beside it, etched into the steel, was something sharp. El Greg's trial, 4C failed. Lucien stared at his name. This was where they had broken him. He moved deeper into the facility. The rooms became less clinical, more primitive. Wooden cribs, scratch marks on the walls. In one corner, children's drawings in chalk smeared by water. Smiling suns, trees, a figure with no face, and written beneath them in a child's scrawl, "He lives under the orchard." His light flickered. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned. No one. But on the floor, fresh footprints in the dust, small, bare. He followed them to a circular room partially caved in. Here, the walls were lined with body drawers, the kind used in morgues. Some were open, empty, others not. He opened one. Inside was a corpse, skeletal, still in a child's hospital gown. A wristband read, "Subject DH." Another drawer held a black mask. Gas mask? No. It was ceremonial. Hand-stitched leather, human hair sewn into the seams, eyes covered. And beside it, on the wall, a recent note scratched with a nail. "The masked one sees you." He remembers. He never left. Lucien backed away, heart hammering. Suddenly, a voice crackled through a speaker in the ceiling, old, distorted. "Welcome back, Subject L." Lucien froze. "You passed, you know. You made it out. But you were never meant to remember." Miriam interfered. She always had a soft spot for broken things. The voice clicked off. A low hum filled the chamber as a door opened at the far end. Lucien stepped into the central operating room. It looked untouched. Monitors, surgical tables, walls covered in plastic sheets and yellowed records. And at the center, the body, still breathing. It was Sheriff Rowe. Alive, but barely. Tied down, his mouth gagged, a fresh cut on his temple, carved into his chest. The word "judge." Lucien ran to him. That's when he heard the door shut behind him. Standing there was a man in a priest's robes, face calm, hands folded. Father James Halbrook, the town's former preacher, missing since the second letter leak. "Lucien," he said softly, "you were always the favorite." Lucien raised the gun. "Why?" Halbrook didn't flinch. "Because Whitley Hollow was never meant to survive. It was an experiment. We needed a place where no one would ask questions. Miriam tried to stop it, but it was never about her. It was always you." Behind Halbrook, another figure stepped forward. Wearing the mask, the same one from the drawer? Tall man, older, silent. Lucien whispered, "Who are you?" Halbrook smiled. "He's the custodian. He keeps the files clean." The masked man raised a scalpel. Lucien fired. The mask shattered, blood spraying the wall. The custodian fell. Halbrook lunged, but Lucien was faster. A shot to the leg dropped the priest screaming. Lucien grabbed his journal, freed Rowe, and they staggered out together, sirens blaring through the compound as the emergency system somehow triggered by him began to flood the lower floors. They made it to the surface just as water burst from the ground, soil liquefied by decades of decay and secrets. The orchard collapsed behind them, swallowed whole. 3 days later, Lucien sat at Miriam's grave. The journal was with him. The letters? Gone, destroyed with the facility. In the story? No one would believe it. But one truth remained. He didn't survive the program. He had become its legacy. And now he was the last librarian of Whitley Hollow. He would keep the secrets. He would tell the truth. When the town was ready. Until then, he would archive the darkness. The past doesn't rest, it waits. In boxes, in letters, in whispers between the stacks.